I started writing music back when I was 8 years old, but I didn't really finish my first piece that I was proud of until I was at the ripe age of 10. But even then, I submitted it to a contest and felt that for sure I would win, but I got a measly honorable mention. I remember crying my eyes out, wondering why me? Why did I fail so hard this time? Little did I know though that fast forward 15, 20 years and I would be writing music that was being played at Carnegie Hall, at Lincoln Center, Disney Hall, and even at the Philharmonie in Paris. And even right now, I've been traveling for a premiere with Ensemble Bern here in Switzerland. But all of this obviously didn't happen overnight. For years, I was just another composer hunched over a desk, wondering if any of this would work out in the end. There are very long stretches within that time period where I submitted to contests, never heard back, seen other composers enjoy the successes that I wanted to have, and just wondering if I would ever get there myself. And I have to say, even after I started getting some of these big premieres, there were always moments where I had to rebuild, rethink, and basically regroup the way that I was doing things as a composer. That being said, the concert music world can be brutal, but my goal is to make it a little bit less brutal for you so you're not making the same mistakes that I did growing up. Over these past 2 decades, I've collected insights that most composers don't talk about in school or even here on YouTube. These are lessons you only learn by hearing your music played in rehearsal over 200 times, getting embarrassed by conductors in front of orchestras, misprinting your parts, and all sorts of mistakes that I made over the years. So today I'm going to share with you the 13 lessons that I wish I had known sooner, categorized from beginner to intermediate to advanced lessons. And my goal with this video is that just one of these lessons make a major impact on your career as a composer. So let's picture this together. You just started your composing journey. You're up writing notes at 3 in the morning, let's say. You have your pencil smudges on your hands, your notation software, it's glowing right back at you. I've had these experiences many times myself. You've got it. You've got that burning desire to be a composer. I call this having the fire or that spark. And initially, it's a very, very powerful drug. I have to say that when I meet a composer for the first time and they have this initial fire, I grow very, very envious myself, because it's that fire that makes you think that one day you have big commissions from the LA Philharmonic, the Berlin Philharmonic, the New York Philharmonic, and so on and so forth. But here's where it gets tricky. Composers expect that initial spark to last forever. And the moment that it fades, that initial fire starts to fade as well. At this point, they think that something is wrong. They think that they've lost their passion for the music. They think that, everyone around them is more obsessed with composing or music in general than they are, and they question whether they should be composers at all. But that initial fire that you have, it's going to fade a little bit as you go forth, but that initial fire is what really gets you to start learning notation, learning some theory, getting yourself out there and getting that first performance that really helps as an energy boost and as a morale boost for any composer just starting out. Now, I've seen this firsthand in the composers that I mentor, people that are on fire in the very beginning, writing every single day, but eventually they start to fizzle out on their productivity. Life starts to get complicated. Maybe your schoolwork is starting to get really busy. Maybe your job is starting to get overwhelming, or maybe you have family or other members that have to get taken care of. Now, I can just give you an example of this just from my perspective. About a year ago, my firstborn daughter came into our lives, and of course I had no idea how much this was going to disrupt everything I was doing, not just in terms of my life in general, but also in terms of my composing and my career as a concert composer. And I just wondered what is going to happen, and I have to be honest, the fire dissipated a little bit from my composing at that time because I was just so enamored with making sure this child was alive. But I realized that no, these things that happen in one's life, they are actually the fuel to keeping the artistry going. These are the things, these moments in your life that help you create better art in the long run. And once I kind of encapsulated all those feelings that I was going through with having a new child, I was able to birth a new piece, let's say. And that's actually the piece that I'm here in Switzerland getting the premiere for, this piece called Wilada, which basically means birth or nativity in Arabic. So there is a way to encapsulate basically all these feelings that you might be going through, even into the art itself. So this all goes to say that the composers that last, they're not the ones that have that fire lasting forever. They're in fact the ones that learn how to keep composing even as the fire starts cooling down. So lesson number 1 is don't stop after that initial fire starts to cool down, because the big breakthroughs are just over that horizon. Now, this next lesson makes me smile because I see it constantly. I'll hear composers, especially younger ones, speaking in absolutes. Nobody programs new music anymore. Competitions are rigged. You need X degree from Y place and Z connections to make it through. But here's the problem when you think that way. When you're starting out, your perception is limited by your experience. What feels like the truth to you right now is just a reflection of your current skill level, your current network, and your current exposure. Take it from me. I remember looking around at the American orchestral scene and wondering how my aesthetic would fit into any of that, because I was noticing a lot of them were playing relatively conservative music by my peers. And I was thinking to myself, how is my microtonal aesthetic going to fit into any of that? Many of these players don't want to necessarily play in that kind of style. They have to basically relearn how to play their instrument. How is that going to work out for me, even though I love writing in this particular aesthetic? But I ended up being completely wrong, because about 10 years ago, I wrote my very first orchestral piece in what I felt was my true aesthetic, the aesthetic that I thought nobody would want to play. And it ended up getting played by 3 major orchestras here in the United States. So this limited thinking that I had, it was because I didn't have enough exposure to what was possible out there. So until you've been at this long enough to really test your assumptions, you should treat your beliefs with a healthy dose of skepticism. Now, younger composers get incredibly worried about what their peers think of them. But here's what you don't realize when you're just starting out. By the time you're in your 30s or 40s, most of the people whose judgment you care about right now will probably not be in the music field anymore. So you have to ask yourself, why cater to the judgment of people that are around you when they most likely won't be around you 10 years from now? Because this is the truth of the matter. If you have a vision of what you'd like to do as a composer, you're going to have to make some out-of-the-box moves that are separate from what any of your peers are doing. You'll probably end up writing pieces that don't follow any of the current trends that are around you. Maybe you'll really hone into your personal identity or even your personal background, or hone into something that makes you feel vulnerable, or you might start your own projects that are devoid of anything else happening around you. And I can guarantee you this, people are going to judge you for it. They'll target you specifically because it's really easy for them to point out these out-of-the-box things that you're doing. But that doesn't mean you have to listen, and this judgment, it doesn't dissipate as you grow older either. Now, as someone myself that thinks out of the box with many of the things that I do, not just creatively, but also in the business sphere of being a composer, I know exactly what it means to be judged, because here in this year 2025, 2026, whenever you're watching this, we as composers have to think across the grain to be able to set ourselves up for a career in today's landscape. So you're going to be judged for that. You're going to be judged for going against the grain, and that's okay. You just have to build a bit of resistance against that and believe in what you're doing. And the reason that I do all this is because I know that over the years, I've helped hundreds, if not thousands, of composers with some aspect of their life, whether creatively or through the business sphere of being a composer. And that's what keeps me going, and that's what gives me that vision and that clarity for the future. That's why this lesson is so important. Do your thing and learn to let other people be wrong about you. Now, if you've ever had a day job like I've had and still do, you'll relate to this. You know those days when you wake up feeling like absolute garbage? Maybe you're sick, stressed, exhausted, but you still have to show up because you need the paycheck. This is exactly the kind of motion I go through when I experience imposter syndrome. Even when I'm not feeling good enough that day, I'm still going to write that music. I'm still going to email the musicians. I'm still going to make videos. I'm still going to move myself forward. And by the way, imposter syndrome doesn't go away when you reach a new goal either. What happens is you just start feeling like an imposter about a brand new set of things. And I'm still feeling imposter syndrome constantly. Before I made it here to Switzerland, I was wondering on the plane, oh my God, are the musicians going to like any of the music I wrote? Because for this specific concert, they rented out an instrument called the arch organo, which you'll see here on the screen. And they rented this particular instrument just for my piece. They had to lug it on this truck. They had to assemble like over 100 pieces together, all just to play my piece. So I kept thinking to myself, my God, is it all just a waste of time in the end of the day, putting all this effort into one single piece? And it was something that I kept saying over and over again in the rehearsals too, until one of the musicians took me aside rather and said, Sad, listen, your piece is great. This was our idea to have you write this organ piece. So whatever happens to the piece, whatever it becomes of it, that's what we wanted. So please, enjoy the process, and whatever comes of it, comes of it. So it just gave me a bit of relief. But even coming into this opportunity, I felt that there was something amiss. So this kind of feeling is never going to go away. It's just going to change depending on the new goalposts that you reach in your career. So here's the truth about composing and imposter syndrome. The people that keep composing aren't the ones that never feel like they're a fraud. They've learned to acknowledge when they feel like an imposter and then set that feeling aside and move forward. All you need is to learn how to say things like, you know what, I feel like an imposter today, but I'm going to write these 8 bars anyway. Or I don't think I belong in this field, but I'm going to send an email to that performer anyway. So that all goes to say imposter syndrome is definitely a real phenomenon. Just go with it and move on. So now we're going to move on from beginner to intermediate lessons for those of you that are a bit further along on the journey. Now, barely anyone listens to me on this, but this is the key reality. Being a full-time composer, in other words, all you're doing is composing music every single day, day in and day out, and that's the only way you're making any money all year round, basically, is overrated. And that's because this dream of wanting to be a full-time composer can really trap you in a desperate mindset. And I know this from other composers that I've talked to. They feel that if they just were full-time composers, they would have all the time in the world to compose. They would have all the time in the world to go and rehearse and to have their performances, and life would just be fine and dandy. Now, the issue with not having a day job while composing music is that it makes you 100% reliant on every single commission that you get offered, every single performance that you have, and every single money-creating vehicle that has to happen for you to make a full-time living as a composer. You can't say no to any one opportunity because you probably need it to survive. And the other big thing that happens is that your brain associates every single artistic project that you have with a high degree of stress because you need to complete that project satisfactorily to be able to have an opportunity to have another commission with another ensemble. And once that type of stress is inserted into the equation, composing doesn't become as enjoyable as it was before. It starts to feel like a high-stakes game of survival. So not having a day job may give you freedom, but it also can give you constant anxiety. So I'd much rather you have boring financial stability because that stability can actually be much more freeing for your composing. Because when you have other income, you can invest in things like recordings of your pieces, you can invest in traveling to performances and rehearsals, and maybe most importantly, you realize that you can write pieces that lead to other future opportunities so that you don't feel like you have to make a considerable amount of money with every single piece that you write. Now, this all goes to say, if you're wondering what I'm doing, I basically have a full-time job between teaching at Columbia University, between teaching at New Jersey City University, between running this YouTube channel and the online academy that goes along with this channel. This is basically a full-time job for me, maybe even more than a full-time job. But this is what gives me that creative energy and that financial freedom to pursue my own projects outside of the full-time activities that I'm doing. And the best part, at least for me, is that all my full-time activities are directly related to music in some way. It doesn't have to be for you per se, but for me it works quite well because in every aspect of my life, from the moment I wake up to the time I go to bed, everything is filled with music in some way or capacity. So I urge you to feel for yourself, like, where can I fit as far as, you as a person in this world? Where can you provide value in some way where you can also be able to commit to your art, commit to your composing, and be able to stick with it for the long term so you can really bear the fruits of the connections that you make, the places that you travel, and the premieres that you're going to have. Now, this next lesson is my secret weapon to having a long-term career in concert music. Psychologists have shown that people are more motivated by the fear of losing something they already have than by the possibility of gaining something new. This is called loss aversion. So one of the most powerful things that you can do as a composer is build a career that you're afraid to lose. Think about it like this. If you have multiple ensembles performing your music, you have dozens of soloists out there that are championing your music, you have recordings out there that anybody can listen to, you're going to fight to protect that. This means that you're not going to casually quit when you have a slow year or a couple of bad performances in a row. So lesson number 6 is that if you want to succeed long term, you have to trap yourself into building something that you don't want to lose. Now, as we know, as composers, we're coming up in a time where information is literally everywhere. This weekend, you can watch 5 different composition masterclasses. You can read up on as much music theory as you want. You can listen to dozens of scores and listen to a bunch of interviews and podcasts with other composers and musicians. Now, all of that feels like progress because you're learning a bunch of things that you didn't know about before. But here's the issue with that. All of this knowledge that you're learning doesn't actually tell you what you actually need to prioritize right now in your own composing life. Picture yourself doing this. You see one composer releasing one album after another, and you think that's what you need to be doing. Or maybe you see another composer and all they're doing is writing for the orchestra, and you think, well, that's what I have to do. Or you see another composer that's attending every single summer festival that you can possibly imagine, and you think, well, that's what I have to do right now too. Now, all of these strategies feels like the thing that would move you to your next compositional goal. So what you end up doing is you try doing all of these things all at once. And then what ends up happening is that instead of being successful with any one of these strategies, you end up having half-baked ideas in all of these different strategies, which doesn't move you towards the next goalpost. So this begs the question, what's actually the key to developing as a composer? Well, to me, the key idea is that you have to pick one composer, one mentor, one framework, and follow that basically religiously for a long period of time to really achieve any sort of result. Imagine like you go to the gym. I like to use this example because this is what I struggle with. I have a personal trainer right now. I go see him twice a week, and I am noticing that I'm getting stronger. I'm lifting more when I'm doing my squats. I'm lifting more with my bench presses. But I realize that even though I'm getting stronger, I know that I could be even better if I followed his framework more religiously in terms of the kind of food that I'm eating. So I can see that things do work when I follow one exact protocol. But the moment that I start to defer from what this coach was telling me to do, I noticed that I was starting to sag a little bit. So really for you, you need to pick one composer, one mentor, whether you go to school, whether you have specific lessons with a specific teacher. You really have to just go all in on the things that they're telling you to do and to try to gauge your progress over a long period of time. Generally speaking, I would say about a year, you can really see the progress that you make when you follow that one specific method. So lesson number 7, if you're going to actually learn from someone, actually learn from them, actually listen to them, and actually follow through. Now, as you start dealing with ensembles, conductors, arts administrators, and so on, you're going to be hearing endless horror stories about composers who missed deadlines, had messy parts, didn't answer their emails, and a whole host of things that we composers tend to do. Now, unfortunately, all of this is way too common, and I've definitely had my fair share of instances when I was the culprit of many of these things. And in response to that, a lot of people will just throw their hands up in the air and say, you know what, the new classical music world is just a big mess, a big farce. But my response is always that the new music world is just filled with people who are bad at treating new music as a serious endeavor that should be treated professionally. You see a New York Times review or you see a social media post about a composer that looks like they have it all figured out professionally. But the bar for being considered professional in the concert music world is actually quite shockingly low, I've found. Because just by turning in readable sheet music, answering your emails in a prompt way, being respectful and on time at rehearsals, you're already ahead of 90% of other classical composers out there. And if you feel like you need any more convincing, I've actually had multiple musicians and conductors tell me in person that they programmed my music again because I was so easy to initially work with. And this isn't just about groups that are performing your music right now. Being professional now is also what ends up getting you your next gig and the gig after that. So lesson number 8 is that the bar is much lower than you think it actually is. So make sure you reach it and then exceed it. Now, statistically, most people are financially illiterate, and composers are certainly no exception. Now, bringing this up isn't about shaming any one person or any group of people in particular. I bring this up because it took me a really long time to be comfortable about money, how it's involved in my life, and how to talk about it. But here's the hard truth. If you don't understand the basics of how money works, your composing life is always going to be feeling like it's hanging on by a thread. Because let's all be honest, it's very hard to make a living solely in this field. So don't make it harder by mismanaging the money that you're already earning. Even simple things like tracking your monthly income and expenses, understanding your local tax code, and making sure you're set up for retirement. These are things that are going to make your career feel more at ease as a composer, even if your income hasn't changed month to month. So lesson number 9 is learn how to manage your money, because once you do that, your career as a composer will feel much more enjoyable in the long run. And speaking of careers, let's talk through some lessons for composers that are already well underway. Now, by now, I've mentored dozens of composers that have gone on to win international contests. They've been commissioned by many organizations. They've gotten into prestigious programs and festivals. And even with these accolades, a lot of them still feel anxious or unsure about their next steps. And many of them think that if they just get X milestone in the future, everything will just be solved just like that. But here's an uncomfortable truth that I want to impart on you. Just because you reach that next big milestone that you always wanted to reach, it doesn't necessarily mean that all of your problems, whether career-wise or personal-wise, are going to get solved. Because especially when it comes to your personal issues, if you're using composing as a vehicle to get away from those issues, the more that you go into your composing life and winning accolades and things like that, and ignoring the personal life issues that you might have, those personal issues might blow up in your face later on. And by the way, I've had to work a lot of this stuff on my own in terms of the personal issues that I have, especially in terms of family dynamics, especially in terms of work-life balance and so forth. These are things that you really have to figure out on your own that are disparate from any big career milestones that you get as a composer, especially the more advanced and the longer that you do this. Now, with all that being said, I can confidently say that the composers that are thriving right now with long-term careers are not the ones that necessarily have the most awards that I've ever seen in my life. In fact, they're the ones that paired career progress with some other personal project, whether that means starting a family, whether that means going to therapy, whether that means participating in their community or in spiritual life. They had something else attached to their well-being other than just attaining career succession. So remember to make sure that as you are hitting these professional career milestones, to not ignore your personal life and to make sure that you're cultivating that project as well. All right, this next lesson might sound obvious, but most working composers still don't do this. So here it is. If your calendar in the next 3 months is not filled with some sort of premiere, commission, or performance, it's probably the result of what you didn't do 6 months ago. But the reason this can be so negative is the story that it allows you to tell yourself. Not having any career progress makes you think that nothing that you do works, or that nobody out there cares about any of the music you're writing. But really, feeling stuck right now is just an example of cause and effect. So here are 3 simple options for what you should do today. Reach out to one performer you respect to ask about collaborating. Post a small update about a recent performance that you had, even if it was 3, 4, 5 months ago. Submit one of your pre-existing pieces to a call for scores that fits your aesthetic. Now, none of these actions on their own are huge at all, but done consistently every single day for the next 3 to 6 months, your life as a composer will change drastically 12 months from now. So lesson number 11 is do something to grow your career every single day. Your future self will thank you for it. Now, a composer's career, I find, is a balancing act between work that pays you now and work that builds assets for later on. But the fantasy that you're led to believe is that you write a piece based on commission, you hear the piece performed live, you earn royalties from that piece, and then you have passive income forever in terms of sheet music sales and royalties from future performances of that specific piece. Statistically speaking, though, you're probably not one of those composers, and I can tell you this, I certainly am not either. So if you want a realistic, sustainable career plan, you need to have at least one part of your career where you know where the next check is coming from, like we've explained in other parts of the video. You have some control of when you work and what you work on, and you don't have to feel like everything depends on what some external gatekeeper decides. So for a lot of composers, this ends up being one of 3 things. Either they're teaching privately or in a school, they're using their other musical skills like performance or conducting, or they're working in a field completely outside of music. Now, your income will probably not be 100% totally in your control all the time, but even feeling like 40 to 50% of your income is actually predictable and sustainable will make you feel that you can have a little bit more freedom in your creative life as you progress going forward. So the major takeaway here is to make sure that one income stream that you have is under your control. Now, about 7-8 years ago, when I was really reaching a new height for myself as a composer, things began to really start falling apart for me. Now, on paper, things actually looked really great. I was being commissioned by the Minnesota Orchestra. I had just won a major prize with the American Academy of Arts and Letters. I had just got into one of the most prestigious PhD programs out there at Columbia University. I mean, things were really going great for me. But behind the scenes, my systems at that time were just not built for the level that I was trying to operate at. I was working twice as hard as I ever had, and I felt like I was constantly behind. I just felt like I was juggling way too many things at once. And I remember feeling really anxious, and I was having imposter syndrome. And I was even telling my private teacher at the time, Georg Friedrich Haas, that maybe music isn't really my thing. Maybe, I'm getting all these awards, but for whatever reason, I'm not feeling great when I'm composing. So what's even the point? And I just kept thinking to myself, maybe this is all I'm capable of. Maybe this is all I'm meant to do. And what I didn't realize at the time was all this chaos that was happening around me wasn't a sign of failure. It was actually a sign of growth, because you can't have any growth in your life without experiencing a little bit of pain, a little bit of frustration, a little bit of suffering. And I just hadn't realized it at that time, that I needed to go through that, let's say, growth spurt, that period of uncomfortability to make it to the other side. Because I feel like we like to imagine this idea of growth as like this diagonal line going up like this. But in reality, it's more like expand, break, rebuild, and then repeat the process over and over again. Because the way you manage yourself when you're working on one commission year is very different than managing yourself when you're working on 4 or even 5 commissions a year. The system that works for writing for your friends in college is very different than the systems that you need to write for a professional orchestra out in the real world. And that messy part where everything starts to feel like it's breaking apart is just your surroundings telling you the systems that you have currently are not currently working, which means that you have to think about a way to rebuild the way that you do things day to day to accommodate the new reality that's around you. So remember, growth doesn't necessarily feel like success. It actually feels like chaos. You are learning to reorganize in real time. So if you're a working composer or a very serious early career composer and you're struggling to figure out what to do next, you don't have to do it alone. That's why I built my mentorship program, to give composers the systems, the feedback, and the community that I had when I was growing up. So if you want to work directly with me and my team to create a concrete plan for commissions, performances, and career growth, all you have to do is click the link in the description below. And if you're curious about what this mentorship looks like in action, you can click on the video over here where you can learn about one of my students and his journey over the last 12 months.